Welcome to the Innovation MOOC. And for this segment, Customer Empathizer, today we're going to talk about what is customer empathizing, how it works, what is empathetic listening, why it's important to the business, and then give you a couple of tools to help you be an empathetic listener. And then just a little bit of theory to help you see how this fits into the big picture. What is customer empathizing? We tend to empathize with other people when, if we were to put ourselves in their places, we would be rattled. If it would shake us up a bit to be going through what they are going through, that is the point at which we start to empathize. We have to remember that all customers have the potential for being upset. Empathy is not sympathy, where you simply feel bad about someone's situation without doing anything about it. Empathy is not restricted to problem solving, since a frustrated customer will want his feelings acknowledged before he's ready to accept your solution. Instead, empathy is the art of understanding and acknowledging a customer's feelings and needs before finding a solution that meets them. When your customer feels understood and cared about, she's better prepared to work with your company over the long haul. So what is empathetic listening? A lot of times we are hearing, but we're not really listening. As you can see by the comments in the slides, we're very busy doing other things in our head instead of listening. This is not new information to all of us. Listening to the voices in our head or our intrapersonal dialogue can be extraordinarily distracting. Why then is it important to our business? Decision makers should be careful not to forget about this underlying human element. In organizations with millions of customers or industries serving the broad public, there's a temptation to stereotype and depersonalize the customer. They become a number, a transaction, a data point, part of a composite character. This type of shortcut might seem useful for understanding data, but we found that it doesn't work well when dealing and designing for real people. There's nothing like observing the person you're creating something for to spark new insights, and when you specifically set out to empathize with your end user, you get your own ego out of the way. We found that figuring out what other people actually need is what leads to the most significant innovations. Empathetic listening is truly hearing what the other party is saying and turning off all of that conversation in our head and focusing on what they are saying. What we would like to achieve is empathetic listening. This is where you are not agreeing, you are not in judgment, but you are very curious and trying to understand what the listener is saying from their point of view. It involves asking lots of good questions and attempting to put your feelings on hold. Most of us, however, are well practiced in sympathetic listening, where we agree, we provide examples that have happened in our lives or in our business that are similar to what they're saying. This usually involves some bit of judgment and opinion and just keeps us from having a very constructive conversation. In order to do this more successfully than you already are, I'd like to share a couple of tools. First off, let's try to assume that you are wrong. I know that's a tough one to take on, but if you were assuming that you were wrong in what your thoughts were, you would listen differently to the person in front of you and ask more inquisitive and intriguing questions. A second technique that someone from the comms department shared with me to help turn off your intrapersonal dialogue or the voices in your head was to take notes as if you had to write a story on what was being discussed. To take that level of detail in your notes forces you to ask really good questions and make sure that you understand the other person's point of view. So how do we get there? There's a great concept that I call getting others to exhale. When they really can feel like you are listening, you'll notice that someone will give you a very deep sigh. And how do we do that? Acknowledging speaks to the content of what the other person is saying And validating is speaking to the emotions behind what they're saying. By doing both, you're then moving forward. If you only do acknowledging and do not validate the emotion behind it, then the person sort of gets stuck and doesn't feel like you are listening to them. But once that emotion is validated, you get to the exhale and they feel like you have heard them. As a simple example, someone is asking me for a piece of chocolate, and I say no, and they persist. But I want a piece of chocolate. You have it right there on your counter. I want it now. There's no reason why I can't. And I provide the every answer possible of yes, it's on my counter, but it's for someone else. Or no, you can't have it because you're allergic. Or not right now at 6 in the morning. We can't have chocolate at 6 in the morning. And I keep responding to the content. And until I say, you know what, you look really upset. And it looks like it's really making you sad that you can't have a piece of chocolate. Then they'll go, yes, that's exactly it. I'm just really want it, and I know that now's not the right time, but I see it and I really want it. Once I've hit their emotions and validated that they have them, they exist, and I hear them, then we get to a constructive conversation. It's easier to validate the emotions behind a conversation when you are aware of your values. It seems kind of odd to think of how values are related to emotions, but our values usually trigger almost all of our emotions. If you are familiar with what your values are, then you'll be better able to understand the values coming through the conversation from the person sitting in front of you. A sample values assessment is in front of you and will be made available on Prism for your review. I strongly encourage you to take the values assessment and discuss its contents with a trusted advisor. Let's take a for instance. How do you know what the values are of other people? It's pretty easy to find out, just by asking the normal Monday morning question of how was your weekend? One person might tell you, it was a great weekend. I spent it outside in the garden, I pruned, I picked up trash, I just loved the weather. And the values behind that are nature, beauty perhaps, and taking care of the environment. That same Monday morning question to somebody different, they may respond with a completely different answer, such as, I went to visit my grandmother and then spent time with my kids going to the zoo. Clearly, they are valuing family and commitment. These are extreme examples, but you can see how in very simple everyday conversation, if we listen differently, we can discover the values of the person that we're listening to. Once you're able to identify your own values, it will be much easier to identify the values of others. So how is this important and useful? It makes us more successful if we know where the other person is coming from. And if we know that they value accomplishment and getting multiple tasks done in one day, then we'll speak differently to that person than if they valued achievement and obtaining a long-term success on a larger project. To solidify these new skills, I'd like to give you just a little bit of theory behind why these skills work. We're going to start with the unconscious incompetence model. The obvious use of this is in performance feedback or in giving feedback to another person in general. But it's a good thing to keep in mind that a lot of people, when you're talking to them, are not aware of your point of view. And so when they are the unconscious incompetent, we can't hold them accountable for that. But by having a very constructive conversation, you are moving them to the awareness. And in that awareness, now they are conscious of your opinion, and the natural reaction is just a little bit of pushback until they understand. Let's look at an example. Let's say that you're chatting with procurement and you would like to purchase company X's services. Procurement, of course, with their value of lowest cost, will provide pushback because Company X is not the cheapest vendor. You value, though, winning the contract, and by explaining to procurement that Company X or Vendor X has great respect for a different vendor that is more expensive, and it will win us the contract by having it in our bid, procurement is now aware. By raising the awareness to procurement, you have now made them a conscious incompetent, and now they will ask the best questions to work in your favor to make sure that that vendor that you require still comes in at the best cost and moves you over into the conscious competent. I hope this content was valuable for you, and I look forward to continuing this conversation online.